I normally don't like ending on a story that just gets me upset. In January of 2024, this ruling kicked in where the effectively the exemption, right? So the land tax kicked in at 300,000, right? And now that dropped to 50,000, and it was meant to, I think from memory they were quoting, it was only going to affect something like 65,000 people in Victoria. Well, guess what?
Well,
it's actually affected a lot more people, Julia. And so I'm going to hand it over to you, Julia, for you to explain who has actually been caught up in this mess. And we are talking about people who live in their own home.
Bryce, if you think that was bad, you ought to have heard him squeal when I told him about this.
I didn't want another one. I wish I had.
Anyway, I knew it was going to be on the agenda when I said it. What's happened? The threshold that if you own any property other than your main residence, if it's unimproved land value, used to be more than 300,000, you were caught for land tax. They've dropped that down to 50,000 now.
The threshold.
So those people think, well, it's still people that own two properties, so fair enough, we've got to recover the money from somewhere. But the trouble is, it's $50,000 worth of land used to produce income or in a business. So if it's your main residence, you might be exempt for part of it, but if the area that you're using for your business or for an Airbnb, or even if you've got a granny flat on it and that's a separate residence you're renting out, if it's any of that used in a significant business, which I'll define in a minute, then you've got to look at how much of the land area that's taking up and say, well, if that's more than 10% and the land's worth 500,000, bingo, you're up for land tax. So significant business, you might think, oh, yeah, but who'd have a significant business in their home? Well, if you earn more than $30,000 in that business, you're caught.
You're cooked.
Yeah, you are. And we're not talking about, I'm going to say, well, how many is that? Maybe 500,000 households? According to an article from Patrick Durkin in the Fin Review on the 18th of March, he's quoted as saying, more than 400,000 Victorians who run a small business or an Airbnb from their family home will be hit with hefty land tax bills for the first time as the state government's change designed to try to retain and kick the debt problem that they've got. So this is unbelievable. Now, what they're doing is they're data matching. So everyone's sort of saying, well, how would they know? Well, if you know,
we're in an AI world.
Yeah, they're obviously data matching with the ATO. And what's your job when you're putting in your tax return is you want to basically try and get the maximum tax you can. So you're declaring that you're, as much as the house as possible, please. Just declare as much as all the costs as possible because I want to offset them. So it's a complete, like they've walked into a absolute time bomb.
That's a tripwire.
That's a tripwire. It's a tripwire. That's the way to call it. It's a tripwire.
So you've got to self-assess and dob yourself in too. Yeah. And if you don't, there could be fines of up to 90%.
And they've already dobbed themselves in because they've been so they've gone back to a last couple of. That's how they're issuing all of these land tax bills. I mean, who would work in the State Revenue Office here in Victoria? I mean, what a horrible job. What a horrible job. Taking money off your fellow Victorians.
Shout out to our listeners from the State Revenue Office.
Yeah, we understand it's a tough job and you're just doing your job. No, yeah, but that a bit. But so there you go. I mean, now the car's crashed and the people have dropped the weight on themselves in the gym and sort of saying, seriously, like, was that the intention in terms of, again, small family-owned businesses, the heart and soul of our country, these small business operators getting slugged again with another $975, and in some cases it's going to be even higher depending on the price of your unimproved land. And you're just trying to run a business.
We already got the Bank of Melbourne. We don't need the Bank of Victoria. They're still using property investors as ATMs for the state, Julian. Here's just another example of them just being greedy.
I give the viewers some useful stuff now. They're raising issue. your ears up and be concerned about that. If your business turnover is more than $30,000, or, now I say or, not and, it's any of these things to trigger it. You employ staff in that business that are not family members, or you're using more than 30% of your home exclusively for business use, that it's not intermingled with other private use. And for the granny flats that, you know, you might be renting out separately from your home. It's not like you've got a self-contained area in your home, but a granny flat that would be considered a separate residence. You only rent on that. Yeah.
Wow. So if you're earning less than 30,000, but you're using more than 30% of your house, do you get caught?
Yeah.
Oh,
Well, it's a bit subjective and all that sort of stuff, but yeah, that's the basic parameters I'd like to give people. And what you've got to do is apply for an exemption anyway, if you want to try and get around it that way. So you'd go for a rule, you know, you'd apply to them and say, well, I'm not, but they're in the examples they give in this ruling. This ruling has been around for years, but back when it was $300,000, it didn't bother people because if it was 10%, that's a $3 million piece of land. It didn't affect many people. But now it's at 10%, it's a $500,000 piece of land. So in that ruling, those are the sorts of examples they give of when they consider it to be a significant business. You'd have to apply to see if you can argue different. And we might get a few more examples because I imagine back in the $300,000 day, that was probably not very tested.
Well, hence, they would have claimed as much of the property as possible. So now I can see all of these Victorian small business operators working from home, even the hairdressers and all that, saying, the storage room no longer.
Yes.
How can I get under that? I'm not going to employ anyone anymore. I'm just going to do it all myself.
Yeah, I earn $29,800.